Well, today, Phil Spencer decided to drop quite a bit of information. A lot of it was just confirming what we had heard previously when we had that Xbox Series X reveal during the Game Awards. We had some press releases. We also had some interviews and some other things kind of put out there. Some of it started to blend with rumor and fact, and it was a little all over the place. And I kind of feel like what we saw released today at Xbox.com, they have like their news section, and Phil Spencer had an entire write-up just going line by line what to expect from next generation, or specifically the Xbox Series X. Now, there is quite a bit of stuff in here, so I wanted to kind of go over it with you guys so you can get an idea as to what's going on here. There is one part I'm actually going to leave out for Newswave tomorrow. It has really nothing to do with specs or anything to that nature. But I wanted to kind of go over this because Phil Spencer confirmed a lot of stuff, and it was just put out there on their website. It wasn't part of like a trailer, a video, or an event. They just dropped the information, kind of like what Sony did with the Wired article, where they threw some stuff in there. But there is some interesting things to go over here because it really does look like, remember how they put 8K on the chip? There's a possibility, I'm just putting this out there, that we could actually see like legitimate 8K games on this system. Okay, it's obviously not something that can be confirmed now. We got to wait to see if developers try it, but I feel like there is a reason that 8K number or that 8K symbol is on that chip, and what we're seeing here with some of this info could point to them trying a few little tricks to get them there. So this was the post that was put up early this morning. 6 a.m. is what they have posted here, and it says what you can expect from the next generation of gaming. Now, they specifically talk about the Series X here. They have not announced anything about a cheaper model that has been heavily speculated and rumored on, and something I still believe could be revealed at E3 as one of their big ace in the holes, like, oh yeah, this system might be $600. It's very possible still, okay, especially with what I've seen here. But there's still a $300 system you can look at as well. It's not as powerful, still plays the same games. Very, very possible. But let's go over the Series X. Now, they put out this little slide here that really just summarizes quite a bit of stuff. 12 teraflops, we had heard about that. I thought that was passed around in interviews. However, there are a lot of people saying that this is like the confirmation of 12 teraflops. And if you look at it at face value from straight computing power, yes, that would be twice as powerful, just straight up by numbers, than the Xbox One X, and several times more powerful than the original Xbox. I think it's something like 8 times more powerful, but that's just from that very basic number. There's a lot of things that still go into the Series X that will put it, I believe, well and above twice as powerful and more capable, I guess would be the right word, than the Xbox One X. Variable rate shading that we'll talk about here soon, hardware accelerated DirectX ray tracing, quick resume for multiple games, and then smart delivery. So let's actually go over some of the stuff here because they did kind of break it down for us. Now, they're going to use, of course, next generation custom processor. We'll use AMD's latest Zen 2 and RDNA 2 architectures. We are still, I believe we're going to see AMD unveil that soon with cards coming out this year. They did mention right at the end of last year, I believe, that they were going to have a refresh for their cards and they were going to work into RDNA 2, and that it would have some sort of ray tracing feature that they would be introducing. We're still waiting on that. I thought we would have heard about that by now, and big introduction and cards, but there are some events coming up where they could show it off. And they go on to say delivering 4 times the processing power of an Xbox One and enabling developers to leverage 12 teraflops of GPU performance. So that's something to really consider here. AMD has not even really shown this stuff off yet, but Microsoft is already talking about how the Series X will use it. The Series X will be a cutting-edge piece of technology when it launches, which is why I'm starting to lean closer and closer towards a higher than even we expected price tag. It would be, I think, unbelievable if they get this thing out at $500. I really am starting to believe that $600 could be the amount that they ask for, unless they want to take a decently sized loss on this thing. But we'll get to the pricing. I think that's going to be a big E3 announcement and could be, again, one of their big things. Big, massive thing could be a $500 price tag. And it sounds crazy now, but based on what we're seeing here, that That would be pretty impressive. Wait, we'll see what the video cards cost that AMD puts out. How about that? Because we should see that probably in the next month or two. We should at least get a video card and pricing on that from them. Then we can kind of compare it here with the new RDNA 2 architecture. Now, they are going to use variable rate shading. They explain it somewhat here, but I think this is going to be something that is not going to be talked about much, but I believe it will be something that really, really helps them if they want to shoot for either higher frame rates or higher resolution or even both combined. Now, the idea here, they explain, like I said, our patented form of VRS empowers developers to more efficiently utilize the power of the Xbox Series X. Rather than spending GPU cycles uniformly to every single pixel on screen, they could prioritize individual effects on specific game characters or important environmental objects. All right, so the idea here is, let's say you're playing a shooting game and you are running around in, say, Call of Duty, and most of your time is spent looking straight forward, right? Especially when you aim down the sights, you're not as much really focusing on what's in your peripherals. You're mostly moving around really fast and seeing what's straight in front of you. They can spend more GPU resources on the stuff that's directly in front of you and spend less on the stuff around the edges of the screen. That could be basically what they do for the most part. Where they try to draw your attention is where most of that power will go, and that's the very basic explanation of what they could do going forward. But this would help with optimizing games and getting higher frame rates or even just better resolutions, and it's something that I considered with something like Forza. Look, they're going to use HDMI 2.1, and we're going to get to that soon. HDMI 2.1 allows for 4K 120 frames or 8K 60 frames. Those are like the heights of those. So after considering that, I do wonder if one of the big announcements at E3 could be that there will be an 8K game, possibly at launch as an option or even through an update, that would allow Forza to have 8K in some format. Whether it is showcase mode, when you walk around the car and look at it, they have 8K resolution, or if they really are able to do all kinds of crazy tricks and stuff and somehow get an 8K image when you're actually racing. That would be something else to see, and based on what they're talking about here, I think it's actually more possible than people are thinking. And they do talk about hardware accelerated DirectX ray tracing. Not surprising. They kind of talked about ray tracing before, all through hardware acceleration, and Sony has talked about the exact same thing. So not surprising to me there, but keep in mind, everything they just talked about, just for the custom chip itself, right? The RDNA 2, the variable rate shading, this hardware accelerated ray tracing, none of that are in current AMD cards. So they are actually working with AMD for whatever their RDNA 2 cards will end up being when they do announce them. They're working with that now. It's kind of like what I remember the PlayStation 4 Pro doing with AMD. I believe it was with Polaris. I think they had access to basically some of their GPU architecture and stuff they were working on before any of that even came out. So something similar here, which tells me that Sony's probably doing the same thing and maybe even doing some of their own customization. It would be interesting if these systems come out and they're actually they're more different from each other than we would have expected, because they're both working with AMD, but they also both have access, it seems anyway, to stuff that's just not out yet, which means maybe they can change and alter and mold that to how they want their system to be. It's something to think about. Okay, here's the section that is, I think, going to make parents excited or people who really have sporadic times when they can actually sit down and play a game. Because if you really consider how much time you spend at loading screens or just starting the game up and seeing all of these really cool engines that they're using and all of these partners that help them build the game, and you're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting just to get into the game, that adds up. Well, the idea here is that they are going to try to cut down on that heavily. They say the SSD storage, of course, which will make loading much faster. That's something most of us experience now with our laptops or PCs, especially if you go to an SSD in your computer, you don't want to go back to a mechanical hard drive. It is painful. Oh my gosh, it is bad. But having an SSD solution inside the system, of course, will make it load faster. They're also going to do something called Quick Resume, and the new Quick Resume feature allows you to continue multiple games from a suspended state almost instantly. So that means that basically, of course, if you stop the game and you have to walk away, you can come back and jump in. I don't know if it saves your spot and then you move to it, because they say multiple games can do that. So maybe it somehow writes where you are, saves it, and then if you move over to another game, it can basically close that, but still keep your progress and where you were in mind, and then you can jump back between them. I like that a lot. That is really, really cool. Moving between games to be that much faster will, of course, make it so we can just play more games and get more time in away from these loading screens and, again, all the introductions for Unreal Engine and all these other things. I'm curious how that'll work with live service games, because once it detects that you are not connected anymore or you're away from your system or your controller, it just kicks you. So a lot of games are going to these always online service games. I don't know if the quick resume will work as well with that, but single player games, RPGs, anything like that, it should work great. They also decided to have an entire section here around dynamic latency input. And the idea here is they're optimizing latency in the player to console pipeline, starting with the Xbox wireless controller, which leverages our high bandwidth proprietary wireless communication protocol when connected to the console. And the idea is to just cut down on input latency. I don't know how many people actually complain. Like, I know some people do, and they're like, oh, I need to have my controller wired. That's the way it is. I feel like the overwhelming majority of people don't even notice input lag with their wireless controller. So it's great. It's cool, I guess. It's good that they're working on that, but I feel like that is definitely a request that is further down the priority list, I should say, for what people really want, but hey, that's neat. It does say proprietary wireless communication protocol when connected to the console. I assume the controllers will also have Bluetooth functionality for connecting to your PC or your phone, since they, of course, want this massive ecosystem, and they probably just want to sell one base controller and then maybe different colors of that controller, of course, and then an elite controller. And I had already talked about HDMI 2.1, of course, with the roof being 8K 60 or 4K 120, and then they go on to say 120 frames per second support. Now, I do want to point out HDMI 2.1 is already in TVs now that are being sold. I believe LG is actually a brand that has quite a few models with HDMI 2.1, and at this point going forward, especially towards the end of this year when these systems drop, if you are going to go looking for a TV, whether it's 4K or maybe you're someone who's like, I'm going all out, I'm getting that 8K TV, make sure you're looking for HDMI 2.1. All right, just you might as well. That way you don't have to buy another TV in like a year or two. Most people, if they want to spend a lot of money on a TV, they don't want to have to then go buy another TV a year down the road. They want it to last an entire console generation, for example, 4 or 5 years. So yeah, make sure HDMI 2.1 is at least equipped. And finally, they do talk about backwards compatibility, something we've heard about before. We did hear that the backwards compatibility team within Microsoft was moving on from the Xbox One. And remember, they delivered all the Splinter Cells and stuff, and that was cool. And they gave us an update saying, hey guys, we're moving on. We got to start working on the next generation for these backwards compatible games. Yes, they name all of it. Xbox One, Xbox 360, original Xbox. And the idea here is that, of course, it will get a bit of a boost with the better performing system. So you'll get better frame rates, they say, higher resolutions, all of that. That's great. I'm happy that we don't have to worry about, oh, can we play our original Xbox game on the Series X? They are indeed confirming that here straight up. That's something that I would like to hear from Sony a bit more about, but hey, that could end up being an advantage that Microsoft has going into next generation, just having all the generation of Xbox systems ready to play. That's pretty cool. I assume it's just going to be the ones that are already compatible now, and they'll just continue to add to that library. And then they also have smart delivery here, and they say that technology empowers you to buy a game once and know that whether you are playing it on Xbox One or Xbox Series X, you're getting the right version of the game on whatever Xbox you are playing on. So they point out Halo Infinite. So if you're playing on your Series X, it will download the correct textures that are needed, whether it is like if you're playing on the Series X, 4K textures or 8K textures. We're going to stick with 4K for that one. Maybe Forza could get something like that, and we get a massive file size. But the idea here is that if a game is compatible across generations, you might not need those textures on your VCR model, right? So the file size will be smaller, but if you pick a game, it can decide which system you have, it knows, and then it'll figure out which different files that you need. Like I said, textures was one that I pointed out, but we could have better audio, for example, on the newer systems and other things. Yes, it'll basically figure that out for you. You don't have to pick, okay, I need the Series X version of this game. I hope that's the right one. It'll figure it all out. I like that. But I have to say, from what I'm hearing with the Xbox Series X, it sounds like Microsoft they have their head screwed on straight for this one. It's not going to be like the Xbox One release that was one of the worst things you've ever seen. It was a train wreck that you couldn't look away from, and then Sony comes in and kicks them back off the track. It was nuts. I feel like at this point we're going into next generation, and strangely it's Microsoft that's kind of leading the way, which is weird because Sony is the market leader, and I would expect them to be the ones leading the way. Microsoft truly is they're just doing what they want, and they're rolling along. So I'm excited to see what Sony has on their end. It seems like we know a lot about the Series X at this point and very little about the PlayStation 5. So hopefully Sony has something for us soon. But right now, next gen is looking pretty exciting from a performance aspect and the idea of, I would say, the convenience of what they're describing here. A lot of people talk about how the Xbox One's current setup, right, where you're kind of navigating the menus, it's slow, it's annoying, it's frustrating at times, right? For some reason the thing stutters all over the place. It's not fun to navigate around, and sometimes it's a bit of a chore just to get into a game and actually start playing. Like 10-15 minutes sometimes. What is going on, right? So I like the idea of them streamlining that and making it so you press a button, boom, you're playing through the way to suspend games and others. So exciting stuff there. But let me know what you guys think about all this information about the Series X. Quite a bit of stuff here. So hopefully kind of going over it gave you an idea of what you can look forward to come November. I'm thinking November, but definitely at E3, because now we know what we're getting into in terms of technology. Now we need to know what we're getting into in terms of games. Thanks guys for watching. Make sure you like the video on the way out if you enjoyed it, dislike it if not, and I'll see you guys next time.